I want to start today by looking at a timeline, but not the usual tech timeline we all obsess over. I've been staring at this research prospectus for, I don't know, a few hours now, and honestly, it's kind of messing with my head.
It definitely reframes things, doesn't it?
That is putting it mildly. Okay, so if you're listening, play along with me for a second. If I asked you to pinpoint the exact moment in history that defined how you use something like ChatGPT today, I mean, the specific decision that set the stage for our whole modern obsession with prompts, instant answers, and, outsourcing our brain power. What year would you guess?
Well, most people are going to say 2022, right? With the launch of ChatGPT.
Yeah, 2022.
Or maybe, if they're a bit more in the know, they'd say 2017 with the Transformer papers from Google.
Right, or if you're a real history buff, maybe you go back to, I don't know, the invention of the internet or the first computer, Alan Turing, something like that.
Sure.
But the research we're looking at today suggests we are off by about 160 years.
It's a pretty radical claim.
It is. We are doing a deep dive into a paper titled From Mechanic Arts to the Delegated Mind, the Morrill Act as the Federal Root of the AI Epistemic Regime.
It's a mouthful of a title, for sure.
It is a total mouthful, but the argument is just wild. It suggests that a piece of legislation signed by Abraham Lincoln back in 1862 didn't just change how colleges were funded.
No.
It actually began the process of rewiring the American brain. It created the, quote, infrastructure for the way we think, or maybe the way we don't think today.
And that's the fascinating premise, because we usually treat technology and, say, legislation as these completely separate tracks. You have Silicon Valley over here doing its thing, and then you have Washington over there doing its thing, and they rarely interact in a deep foundational way.
Right, they react to each other, but one doesn't grow out of the other.
Exactly. But this source argues they are deeply, deeply intertwined. The core idea is that the Morrill Act of 1862, which established the whole land-grant university system, made a very specific value judgment. It put its thumb on the scale.
And what did it weigh in favor of?
Utility, pure utility. Farming, mechanics, the practical stuff. And it did so implicitly at the expense of the symbolic, the classical, or the philosophical.
Okay, hold on. I want to push back on this right away, because my first reaction is skepticism. You're telling me a law about farming and building stuff in the 1800s is directly responsible for me using an LLM to help write an email.
It sounds like a stretch.
It sounds like a huge stretch. Isn't that a bit of a butterfly effect fallacy? I mean, come on, Lincoln wasn't sitting in the White House thinking about algorithms.
No, of course not. Lincoln wasn't thinking about algorithms, but he was thinking about what kind of knowledge was valuable for the future of the nation. And that is the absolute key.
Okay.
The argument isn't that Lincoln invented AI. It's that the Morrill Act started a trajectory, a 160-year-long shift in our cognitive focus. It turned us culturally from a people that uses tools to save labor into a people that now uses tools to save thought.
Yeah. That phrase, that is the one that really stuck with me from this paper. Moving from labor saving to thought saving. Because we always sell AI as this great efficiency tool, right?
Always.
The pitch is, oh, it frees you up from the mundane stuff so you can do the big creative thinking. But this deep dive, this whole paper, is asking a much scarier question. What if it actually just trains us to stop thinking entirely?
Precisely. And I think we need to frame this correctly for everyone listening right now. This isn't just a history lesson about some dusty old law.
No.
It's really a philosophical investigation into the why of our entire education system.
Yeah.
If you look at the last century and a half, you see this slow, steady process. We have gradually stripped away the value of intellectual struggle, the struggle to interpret a difficult text, the struggle to synthesize disparate ideas, the struggle to just sit with ambiguity.
You've optimized for the answer.
We've optimized for getting the right answer as fast as possible. And now, with generative AI, we have the ultimate answer machine.
Yeah.
It's the logical endpoint of that journey.
So the question, the real deep dive question for today is, what happens to our interpretive muscles when we finally stop using them for good?
That is the question.
Yeah.
And it's a critical one.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to go back to the very beginning. Section 1 of this paper, the legislative seed. The year is 1862. The Civil War is, it's raging.
The country is literally tearing itself apart.
Exactly. And amidst all that chaos, all that bloodshed, Abraham Lincoln takes the time to sign the Morrill Act. Now, I vaguely remember this from history class, land-grant colleges, but I mostly associate them with big state schools, massive football stadiums today. What was the actual intent back then? Why was this such a big deal?
You have to really put yourself in the atmosphere of 1862. The Union is in a desperate existential fight for survival.
Right.
There is a massive urgent need for resources, for industrial modernization, for technical expertise. Before this act, if you went to college in America, and very few people did, you were going to places like Harvard, Yale, Princeton.
And you were studying the classics. We're talking Latin, Greek, theology, rhetoric.
Exactly. The liberal arts in their most traditional form. It was an education designed for the absolute elite, and it was focused on symbolic analysis, moral philosophy, and rhetoric. The goal was to shape a gentleman scholar,
A thinker.
a thinker, someone who could contemplate the big questions. Who are we? Why are we here? What is the nature of the good?
Which is all very noble, but it doesn't help you build a better cannon or design a railroad or increase the corn yield to feed the army.
And that was precisely the tension. The United States was this burgeoning, industrializing nation with a massive frontier. The government didn't need more young men who could quote Cicero.
They needed doers.
They needed engineers, agronomists, military tacticians, chemists. They needed people who could make things and make things work. So Justin Morrill, who was a representative from Vermont, pushed this act through Congress.
And the mechanism was land, which is why it's called the Land Grant Act.
Yes. It's actually a pretty clever piece of federal policy. The government granted huge tracts of federally owned land to each state. The states were then free to sell that land.
And use the money to fund colleges.
And use the proceeds to establish and fund these new colleges. But, and this is the absolute crux of the argument, there was a catch. There was a federal mandate.
What was the mandate?
The mandate was that the primary purpose of these new institutions had to be teaching agriculture and the mechanic arts.
Mechanic arts. It sounds so steampunk. I love that phrase.
It's a great phrase. It was just the 19th century term for engineering and all the applied sciences. Now, the act didn't ban the classics. You could still teach them.
But the money, the federal backing, was for the practical stuff.
Precisely. It was a state-sponsored shift in value. For the very first time, the federal government was putting its thumb on the scale of knowledge and saying, we, the government, will pay for this kind of education, but not that kind. It was a declaration that knowledge that builds things, grows things, or fixes things was now the priority.
That distinction feels huge. It's the government literally defining what counts as being smart. It's basically saying, look, if you can quote Plato, that's a fine hobby, but if you can build a steam engine, that's a real education.
And you can see how that echoes through to today. It established a hierarchy of value that, this paper argues, we are still living inside of. This is where the source introduces the metaphor of the federal root system.
I like that.
If you imagine American education as a giant forest, the Morrill Act wasn't just another tree. It planted a very specific species of tree, the utilitarian technical tree, and it gave it federal fertilizer.
So over 160 years, that's the forest we're all living in.
Exactly. The whole ecosystem of knowledge shifted. It wasn't about the cultivation of the soul anymore. It was about the cultivation of the land and the mastery of the machine.
But I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Wasn't that necessary? I mean, wasn't it a good thing? We needed to industrialize. We needed to feed a rapidly growing population.
It was incredibly successful.
Right. If we had all just stuck with Latin and Greek, America probably wouldn't have become the economic and military superpower it did in the 20th century.
You're absolutely right. And the source is very clear to acknowledge that. This isn't an argument that the Morrill Act was bad in an economic sense. The system worked incredibly well for its intended purpose. It helped build modern America. The bridges, the dams, the skyscrapers, the modernized farming that fed the world for a century. It created a massive, technically proficient middle class.
So what's the downside?
The argument isn't about the economic gain, it's about the cognitive cost. The paper argues that while we gained this incredible technical dominance, we began a slow, almost imperceptible process of atrophy in other crucial areas of the mind.
It's the opportunity cost, what we lost by choosing that path.
Yes, we started to view education not as the shaping of a mind, but as the acquisition of a toolkit for economic output. The primary question of education shifted from what does it mean to be a good human to how can I be a productive worker? We shifted it from valuing meaning to valuing utility.
And that subtle shift, that little tilt, sets the stage for everything that comes later.
It's the first domino.
Which brings us to section 2 of the paper, the first great diminishment. This is where the author traces the evolution of this idea from 1862 all the way to 2020. So this wasn't just a one-time law, it was, as the paper says, a deepening groove in the American psyche.
Right. It's like a snowball rolling down a very long hill. It just keeps picking up mass and momentum. The first big acceleration point the paper identifies after the original act is the Second Morrill Act of 1890.
Okay, what happened in 1890?
Well, this is an uncomfortable but really necessary part of the history to discuss. This is where race enters the equation in a very explicit way.
How so?
The 1890 Act provided more funding and expanded this technical mandate, but it also formally codified the racial segregation of the system. It basically said that states could not receive this funding if they denied admission to their land-grant colleges based on race.
So it was an anti-discrimination law?
Sort of, but with a huge loophole. The loophole was that states could comply by establishing separate land-grant institutions for black students. Separate, but equal. Though, of course, it was rarely equal.
And this led to the creation of many HBCUs.
Exactly. Many of our great historically black colleges and universities were established as land-grant institutions under this act. Schools like Florida A&M, North Carolina A&T, Tuskegee University.
So even in a deeply segregated society, the underlying message from the government was the same for everyone. You all need to be learning mechanic arts.
That's the key insight. It shows the government was doubling down on this model as the universal standard for what an education is. They wanted a vast, technically skilled workforce, an industrial army, as some called it, across all racial lines, even if those lines were brutally enforced in every other aspect of society.
It reinforces this idea that the primary purpose of a citizen, any citizen, black or white, is their economic and productive utility.
Your value is what you can build, what you can produce. That was the message.
Okay, so we have this agrarian industrial focus dominating American education for nearly 100 years. But then the world changes dramatically. The Cold War happens. And suddenly, knowing how to fix a tractor isn't enough to guarantee national survival.
The stakes get much, much higher.
We need to talk about the moment the humble mechanic was reborn as the heroic scientist.
October 4th, 1957. Sputnik 1.
The panic must have been just unreal. I mean, you can read about it, but to live it, the Soviets, our mortal enemies, launched this little beeping ball of metal into orbit, and America collectively loses its mind.
It was a profound crisis of confidence, a technological Pearl Harbor, some called it. The perception overnight was that the Soviet education system, which was notoriously rigorous, technical, and frankly brutal, was outcompeting the American system. We were falling behind.
And our response was to militarize education.
In a way, yes. A year later, in 1958, Congress passed the National Defense Education Act, the NDEA.
National defense. They didn't even try to hide it. They literally put defense in the name of an education bill.
That tells you everything you need to know about the shift in thinking. This is the moment where the source suggests the justification for a practical education went from economic utility to national security.
It's no longer just learn math to get a good job.
No, it was learn math to save the country from nuclear annihilation.
So if you were a bright high school student in, say, 1959, choosing to study engineering or physics wasn't just a career choice, it was a patriotic duty.
Absolutely. And conversely, what about the student who wanted to study poetry or philosophy?
It would be seen as, what, a luxury? Frivolous?
Or even a liability, a waste of valuable brain power that could be used for the national good. The NDEA poured staggering amounts of federal money into science, mathematics, and foreign languages, but only strategically important ones, like Russian.
And this pivot just hammered another nail in the coffin for the humanities.
It further marginalized them.
Yeah.
It solidified this cultural idea that we still have today, that hard sciences are serious, objective, necessary, and funded, while the soft subjects are subjective, optional, and secondary.
And this leads directly to what the paper calls the rise of measurement. I feel like this is where the modern school system that you and I grew up in really starts to take shape. Standardized testing, GPA obsession, metrics for absolutely everything.
That's the next logical step. It's the symbolic shift from a focus on meaning to a focus on measurement.
Explain that.
Well, think about it. You can easily measure the success of the mechanic arts. You can measure how much weight a bridge can hold. You can measure the trajectory of a missile. You can measure crop yields per acre. These are concrete, quantifiable outcomes.
But you can't really put a number on how well someone understands the human condition after reading Shakespeare.
Exactly. It is much, much harder to measure the depth of a student's grasp of a paradox in literature, or the nuance of a historical argument, or the elegance of a philosophical proof. So because the new defense-oriented system prioritized what could be measured, because that's what the federal funding and the national goals required, our definition of learning started to shrink to only what could fit on a bubble sheet.
And this is where the interpretive muscles start to atrophy. I really like that term.
Is a great metaphor.
Mm.
Those muscles are your ability to sit with ambiguity, to wrestle with a concept that doesn't have a single right answer, to synthesize your own meaning from complex information. But as we became obsessed with measurement, we started valuing the final answer, the output, the score, far more than the messy internal process of understanding.
It feels like this sets the stage perfectly for where we are now. If we spent the better part of 160 years telling students the goal is the correct answer and the faster you can get it, the better, then of course we're going to embrace AI with open arms.
We built the perfect landing pad for it. We've been culturally preparing for an answer machine for over a century.
That is what the paper calls the first great diminishment. We moved from a holistic view of the mind as something to be cultivated to an instrumental view of the mind as a tool to solve measurable problems.
But now, the author argues, we're entering the second great diminishment, which is potentially much more profound and much more dangerous.
This is the era of the delegated mind, the timeline from roughly 2020 to the present. And the paper calls this a phase shift. I really want to dig into this because I think a lot of people listening might say, okay, so what? We've always used tools to think. We use the abacus, we use calculators, we use Google for 2 decades. How is ChatGPT really any different?
It's a completely fair and very important question. The difference, the paper argues, lies in the fundamental relationship between the human and the tool. In the first era, the mechanical era, let's say, from 1862 all the way to 2020, the primary tool was the machine, and the human's role was that of the operator.
Okay, the operator of the machine.
Think about a tool like a slide rule. You've seen one, right?
I've seen them in museums. I have zero idea how to use one. It looks like a ruler having a midlife crisis.
A great description. A slide rule is a brilliant little analog computer. It helps you do complex multiplication, division, roots, logarithms, trigonometry, all with incredible speed for its time. But here is the critical distinction. The slide rule does not know math.
Right, it's just wood and plastic.
To use a slide rule effectively, you, the human operator, must already understand the mathematical principles. You have to know how to formulate the problem, how to set the scales correctly, and crucially, you have to know where the decimal point goes, which the slide rule will not tell you. You have to bring the intelligence to the tool.
So the tool saves you from the tedious part, the labor.
It saves labor, the manual grunt work of calculation, but it absolutely requires mastery from the user. If I hand you a slide rule and you don't know calculus, it's just a stick.
The cognitive burden is on me. The paper calls this instrumentalization. I'm using an instrument to achieve a goal that I already understand. I'm the pilot. The tool is the plane.
A perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
But now, look at generative AI. The primary tool is no longer the machine, it is the model.
And the human role shifts from pilot to what? A passenger?
The paper suggests our role is shifting to consumer, or at best, prompt engineer. The entire cognitive paradigm is shifting from instrumentalization, how do I use this tool to do the work, to delegation. What should I ask this thing to do for me?
That's a massive, massive psychological shift. It's subtle but huge.
It is. The paper has this great comparison table breaking it down. It points out that in the mechanical era, the goal of education was mastery of tools. In this new delegated era, the goal is becoming the optimization of prompts.
Let's go back to the student example. We compared the 1962 student with their slide rule. Now let's teleport to the 2026 student with a sophisticated LLM.
The 2026 student can be faced with a problem in a domain they do not understand at all. Let's say a complex coding problem in Python, or an essay prompt about Hegelian dialectics.
Things I definitely don't understand.
Right. They can paste that prompt into the model and ask for a complete solution, and the model will give them a perfect or near-perfect finished product.
And unlike the slide rule user, the student doesn't need to know Python or Hegel to get that result.
Not at all. The tool doesn't just save them the labor of typing, it saves them the labor of thought. The student does not need to comprehend the underlying principles of the problem in order to arrive at the solution. They just need to know how to ask the right question.
That is the really scary part for me. We aren't just using better, faster tools. We are changing the nature of the user. If the tool is doing the actual thinking and I'm just sort of approving the output, am I really learning? Or am I just becoming a supervisor of automation?
You're becoming a manager.
Yeah.
A bureaucrat of knowledge. You prove the output, but you lack the foundational skill to have generated it yourself. And this leads us to the absolute core concept of this entire paper, which I think is the most important takeaway for anyone listening, the concept of epistemic friction.
Epistemic friction. Okay, that's section 4. Now, usually when I hear the word friction in the context of technology, it's a bad thing.
Always.
User experience designers spend their entire lives trying to remove friction. One-click ordering, seamless transitions, intuitive interfaces. We want everything to be smooth and easy. But this author is arguing that in learning, friction is a good thing.
Not just good, essential. Think about it in simple biological terms. How do you build a muscle?
You lift heavy things, you create micro tears in the muscle fibers so they have to repair and grow back stronger. Resistance.
Exactly. You introduce resistance. If you went to the gym and just lifted 1-pound styrofoam weight, you could do 1,000 reps, but you would never get any stronger. You need the resistance of gravity. You need the struggle. Epistemic friction is the cognitive equivalent of gravity for the mind.
So it's that feeling of resistance you get when you're reading a really difficult text and you have to reread a sentence 3 times for it to make sense.
That's it. Or it's that frustration when you're trying to write an essay and you can't quite articulate your thoughts, so you just stare at the wall for 10 minutes trying to find the right words.
I hate that feeling. I feel so unproductive.
We all do. It's uncomfortable. It feels like failure. But the argument here is that the struggle is the learning. That moment of frustration is your brain doing the hard work. It's synthesizing, it's connecting neurons, it's building new and stronger pathways.
So when I'm staring at a blank page feeling stupid, I'm actually getting smarter.
In a very real sense, yes. In the old Morrill Act era, even though it was all about mechanic arts, there was still a ton of friction. You had to physically wrestle with the material world. You had to build the engine, and the metal fights back. The wood splinters, the math is hard and fights back. Friction was an unavoidable feature of reality.
But AI is designed to remove that resistance. It's a friction removal machine.
The paper calls this the ironing effect, which I think is a brilliant metaphor. Generative AI acts as a cognitive iron. It takes the rugged, wrinkled, difficult terrain of a new thought or complex problem, and it just smooths it all out.
You ask, write me a polite but firm email to a client about a missed deadline, and boom, it's smooth, coherent, perfect. No struggle, no staring at the wall, no wrinkles.
And therefore, no muscle growth.
That is the risk. The paper calls it cognitive atrophy. If you never lift the heavy cognitive weight yourself, your muscles wither. If you never have to personally wrestle with a complex idea because the AI synthesizes it for you instantly, your interpretive muscles just wither away from disuse.
And there's another, more subtle danger to this ironing effect that the paper points out. It's what it calls the loss of ambiguity.
What does that mean?
This is a really profound point about the human mind. Our brains have this incredible capacity to hold 2 or more conflicting ideas at the same time. We can understand paradox. We can sit with a question that doesn't have a clean, simple answer. Was Hamlet truly mad, or was he just pretending?
There is no single right answer to that.
Exactly. The ambiguity is the point. That's where wisdom lives, in the gray areas.
But AI, by its very nature, hates ambiguity.
It's an ambiguity-killing machine. An AI model is, at its core, a probabilistic engine. It's designed to predict the next most likely word or token based on a massive data set of all the human language it's been trained on. By its very definition, it gravitates toward the mean, the average, the consensus. It looks for the highest probability, most common answer.
So the AI wants to give you the answer. It doesn't want to say, well, it's complicated, and literary critics have argued for centuries, and both sides are kind of right and kind of wrong, and it really depends on your interpretation.
It could be prompted to mimic that kind of nuance, of course. But its default setting, its very architecture, is designed to smooth out the edges and converge on a single, confident-sounding output. It kills the ambiguity that sparks deep thought.
And when we come to rely on that, we lose our own tolerance for uncertainty. We start to crave the convenience of a singular, machine-generated consensus.
And we stop looking for the weird, the idiosyncratic, the truly original leaps of imagination that only a human mind can make precisely because they are statistically improbable.
That is such a key point. So much of human genius is about the outlier thought, the idea that shouldn't make sense on paper but somehow does. AI is designed to give us the average of everything everyone has ever said about a topic. It's the ultimate C student. It's never really wrong, it's always competent, but it's never, ever brilliant.
And that leads us directly into the darkest part of this paper. Section 5, the hollowed mind.
This sounds like a sci-fi horror movie titled The Hollowed Mind, but it's an actual research concept, right? Explain this to me.
It describes a cognitive state where the foundational tasks of knowledge, the basic building blocks, the mental models, are so consistently offloaded to technology that the human shell remains intact, but it's empty of the underlying capability.
Okay.
And the paper makes a really critical distinction here between how experts use these tools and how novices use them. This is crucial for anyone listening who uses AI in their job or for their studies.
Break that down. The expert versus the novice.
Okay, let's say you are a senior software engineer. You have 20 years of experience. You deeply understand logic, architecture, data structures. You've debugged 1,000 nightmarish problems. You use an AI assistant to generate some boilerplate code for you.
To save time.
Right. It spits out 50 lines of code. You scan it, and your experienced brain immediately spots a subtle bug or a potential inefficiency. You fix it in 10 seconds, and you move on.
You are the master using a very powerful tool, the pilot in the cockpit.
Exactly. You are using AI to accelerate your already expert workflow. You have what the paper calls cognitive sovereignty. You have the independent authority to judge the machine's output. But now, imagine a novice, a first-year computer science student.
Okay.
They're given the same problem. They use the same AI to write the code. They get the same output. They run it, and it works. But they don't know why it works. They don't see the subtle bug. They couldn't have written it themselves from a cold start.
They skipped the gym. They got the result without the workout.
They skip the gym entirely. The paper says they are bypassing the slow, painful psychological development required to build an actual mental model of how the world works. The expert used years of friction to get where they are. The novice is using a frictionless path to the answer.
And the inevitable result of that is dependency. The novice can't function without the cognitive prosthetic.
And this creates what the paper describes as a profound shift in our role, from being producers of insight to being curators of output.
Curators of output. That hits uncomfortably close to home. I feel like that's half my day sometimes. Scrolling through 5 different options the AI gives me for an email subject line and just picking the one I like best. Yeah, option B feels right.
And there's nothing wrong with that in moderation. But when it becomes the primary mode of work, it creates what the author calls a competence gap. We become very good at selecting between given options. We develop great taste. Oh, I like this phrasing better than that one.
But we're losing the ability to generate the phrasing from a cold start.
Exactly. If the power goes out, if the server goes down, if you're faced with a truly novel problem that has no template, can you still think? Can you still write? Can you still generate the options yourself?
This connects directly to the idea of the black box and what the paper calls epistemic opacity. If we're just curators, we don't really know how the answer was generated inside the machine. We just have to trust it. And why are we so willing to trust it? Because of everything we discussed from Section 2. Because for 160 years, our educational culture has trained us to value the correct output and the final measurement above all else. We are culturally primed to accept the authority of the black box.
We don't care how it got the answer, as long as the answer looks right and gets us a good grade or solves our immediate problem.
It's the trap of efficiency. But the paper argues this leads to something really dangerous, a loss of interpretive sovereignty. That sounds dramatic, but it's like we're losing the kingdom of our own minds.
Sovereignty means you're the ruler of your own domain, your own country.
Right. So cognitive sovereignty means you are the ultimate ruler of your own mind. You are the one who decides what is true, what is valuable, what something means. When you delegate the active analysis and synthesis to an AI, you are, by definition, delegating your values.
You're letting the model decide what's important in a piece of text.
You are letting the model's training data, which, as we said, is a statistical average that favors the safe, the common, the status quo. You're letting that decide how you should interpret the world. You're outsourcing your judgment to a statistical cloud.
That is a genuinely depressing thought. So are we doomed? Is the future just a bunch of hollowed-out minds staring at screens, passively curating output generated by machines while our own brains slowly turn to mush?
Well, thankfully, the paper doesn't just end on a spiral of doom. It actually proposes a solution. The final section, Section 6, is called the Antidote.
Okay, good. Reclaiming the sovereign mind. So how do we do it? Do we all have to smash our computers and go live in the woods, become Luddites?
No, and the author's very, very clear on this point. This is not a Luddite manifesto. We are not going back to 1860. The technology is here. It is incredibly powerful, and it can be very useful. The solution isn't to reject the tool, but to fundamentally change our relationship with it.
Oh.
We need to consciously and deliberately reintroduce productive friction into our lives.
Productive friction. Okay, what does that actually look like in practice? Does it mean I have to use a slide rule for my taxes?
Not quite. It means we need to stop viewing the humanities, literature, philosophy, deep history, the arts as soft skills or optional hobbies that are nice to have if you have the time. We need to rebrand them in our own minds
Rebrand them as what?
as resistance training for the mind.
I love that. So reading a dense, difficult book like Crime and Punishment isn't just about enjoying a story. It's a heavy bench press for your brain.
That is the perfect way to think about it. When you force yourself to read a complex text or write a long-form argument from scratch or learn a musical instrument, you are forcing your brain to do the heavy lifting of interpretation, symbol decoding, synthesis, and empathy. You are building the very neural pathways that allow you to handle complexity and ambiguity on your own.
So in a world where answers are cheap, almost free, the ability to ask a good question, and maybe more importantly, the ability and the patience to struggle with that question, becomes the most valuable skill of all.
The paper argues that we need to view the humanities not as a retreat from our technological world, but as the necessary counterbalance to it. They are the only proven method for maintaining the ability to think independently in an increasingly automated age.
It all comes back to keeping a strong human in the loop.
A strong human, not a hollowed-out one. We have to ensure that the human is the one making the meaning, even if the machine is helping generate the text. We have to be disciplined. We could use the tool to save labor, but we must never, ever allow ourselves to use it to save thought.
We have to keep the meaning-making engine inside our own heads and not just rent it from the cloud.
Precisely. That is the entire antidote in one sentence.
Wow. This has been heavy, but heavy in a good way. Let's try to recap this incredible journey because it's a long 160-year arc.
It is. We started back in 1862, the Morrill Act. The federal government makes a value judgment and decides that valuable knowledge is practical knowledge, mechanics, agriculture. That planted the seed of utility.
Then for the next century and a half, that tree just grew and grew. We pivoted from utility to national security with the Cold War and the NDEA, which turbocharged the focus on STEM. We started to value measurement above meaning, and in the process, we slowly let our interpretive muscles atrophy.
And then, just a few years ago, the second timeline began. Generative AI arrived. And because our culture was already perfectly primed to value efficiency and correct outputs, we happily handed over the cognitive keys. We started shifting from using machines to save labor to using models to save thought. We began our transformation into curators of output.
And the ultimate danger is what the paper calls the summary trap. We get the answer without the understanding, risking a future of hollowed minds. But the antidote is within our grasp. It's not about rejecting technology. It's about seeking out productive friction.
It's about valuing the struggle again. Reading the hard book, writing the messy first draft, solving the problem ourselves first before we ask the bot for the easy answer.
The difficulty of learning is not a bug to be fixed by AI. It is the very feature that makes us sovereign, thinking human beings.
Well said.
It really changes how I look at that blinking cursor on a blank page. It's not an enemy to be defeated as quickly as possible. It's a gym for my brain.
It is. It's an opportunity.
I want to leave everyone listening with one final provocative thought. It's something from the research note at the end of the source material that has been stuck in my head since I first read it. We've talked today about how the Morrill Act diminished the symbolic mind by prioritizing the hand, and how AI now threatens to diminish the sovereign mind by prioritizing the output.
Right.
But the author poses this haunting question. What happens to the human habit of wrestling with the unknown?
That is the ultimate question.
If we always have an answer, even if it's a mediocre one, even a hallucinated one, but it's instantly available, are we preparing ourselves for a future where we no longer know how to struggle for an answer? When we finally hit a problem that is so new, so strange that the AI can't help, will we still have the mental muscles, the patience, the will to think for ourselves? That's the question we all need to start answering.
Indeed.
Thank you for diving deep with us today. Go find some productive friction. Go lift some heavy books. We'll see you next time.